With great pleasure, I want to introduce our next guest, Mr. Bruce Dehnert. Bruce received his MFA from Alfred University in New York, a member of the International Academy of Ceramics. He teaches at various art organizations worldwide. His work can be found in many national and international collections, including the White House. Dehnert has written numerous articles and co-authored the book Simon Leach, A Pottery Handbook. He recently led wood firing workshops in Japan, India, and the US, amongst others, and is currently head of ceramics right here at Peters Valley School of Craft. Welcome, Bruce Dehnert.
Welcome, everybody. Hey, thanks. My work is autobiographical, and I make pots, I make sculpture. And this workshop, the Onagama, Making for the Onagama, which was supposed to start tonight, is a 4-day workshop, and then it leads into loading and firing the Onagama. And the Onagama is a large 65-foot long wood-fired kiln here that was built in 1980. And this would have been the first year that I would have been leading the workshop since I started here 20 years ago. And so next week is the firing workshop. And so just to let all of you know that I'll be, in my presentation, I'm going to be presenting a variety of people who I've had the pleasure and the honor of firing with during those 20 years. But tonight's presentation is going to be more about the making and what I think about in terms of my own work and the fabrication of it. So as I was saying, my work tends to be autobiographical, whether it is functional work or whether it is sculptural work. But I'm in two very different brains when I'm working those two different ways. So, but at the very fundamental level, I bring my background into my work, or at least I try to. And that has to do with where I was born and raised, and that is out in the West. And this is looking towards my hometown in Wyoming. This is about 15 miles away. This is Red Canyon. The mountains to the left and slightly out of view are Wyoming's tallest mountains, reaching up to around 14,000 feet. And those are granite, but they give away to this alluvial kind of a limestone, sandstone plain. And to the back of me here in the photograph is the Great American Red Desert, which is one of the world's largest deserts. So that rock, as you notice, is red, and it's loaded with iron, even though it's limestone. So I try to, in my work, I try to bring something of that place to my work. My father was an architect and my mother was a journalist. My mother made trouble, and my father made really great places for people to live or go to school or whatever. He dealt with large projects, small projects. And my work is, I try to have a dialogue with my father in my work, whether it's in my pots or whether it's in my sculpture. This is one of his buildings at the University of Wyoming. It's called the Arena. It is where they play basketball, volleyball, and rock concerts. So one of the amazing things about that space that I think you might be able to just feel on kind of a visceral level is the audio quality. So whether you're attending a basketball game or whether you're attending a rock concert, the audio, the sound inside that space is just phenomenal. And in a really kind of interesting sort of way, I think that he probably designed his spaces as much about comfort and how the body interacts with the space, but also the way the eyes and the ears interact with the space. So I try to bring something of that into my work, and so the first few slides are just going to be about my sculptural work. So this is an installation that I made in New Zealand, where I lived for a long time, and one of the fantastic things about New Zealand is that the environment there is so dynamic. you have glaciers that move down into and crush palm trees, and it crushes flowers, rhododendrons and roses, and it's just one of the most unique environments in the world. So with this installation going back to the 1990s, I tried to approximate some aspect of that dynamic of snow meeting subtropical or semi-tropical. It was also about love. It was about my love for Kulvinder, and it was also my love for architecture. So I chose my three favorite architects, Michael Graves, I.M. Pei, and my father. And I built little mounts on the wall that were wood-fired, soda-fired, oxidation-fired, that were little vignettes, or they were motifs from all of those, from the architects who I just mentioned. And so that those became mounts for these roses or these flowers. And it was kind of a recyclable kind of project where the material that I would cut away from the mounts would then be kept in plastic bags and turned into flowers later. So there was this kind of a roundabout process to it. And so it was kind of an exercise in spontaneity and responding to the material and responding to architectural motif and so forth. These are a couple of sculptures that I did in my early time here at Peters Valley. They are based on memory. Anagama firing is very, very much about memory. That's the way that I view the process. The flow of the gases through the kiln, the flow of the ash through the kiln, the experience of firing, because it's always fired with a crew of people. So the fire creates memory on the work. And so I embarked upon a series of sculptures that were about my memory of sledding with my brothers and my sister, and I call these sledists. And we always kind of imagined ourselves to be somehow militaristic on these sleds and so forth, blasting through the Wyoming winter. And so I kind of viewed that as a way of using Anagama technique, whereas there is all this layering of process and layering of ash and so forth onto the surface of the work that kind of marks where I've been, where I'm going, and so forth. So this piece here is a more recent sculpture, and my struggle with my pots throughout my time as a potter has been trying to find that dialogue with my father and my pots. In the sculpture, it's not so difficult, and so I use a lot of my dad's motifs from his buildings. He was one of the early practitioners of solar energy and also rammed earth and so forth. And so I've always tried to look at his work and try to bring that into the sculpture. But with the pots, it was something that was very difficult until this exercise. And this exercise had to do with the Greek calyx. And it was a project that Melaine Syracuse, who is on the board of directors here at Peters Valley, came up with a number of years ago, and asked artists from different materials to respond to the calyx. And so I did that, and it was with this piece that I was able to start to imagine how I might bring architecture into the pots as well. This is an ingot. So the ingot has geometric aspects to it, but it also has autobiographical aspects. So it has a little bit of religion in there. It has the wood firing aspect to it and so forth. This piece called Tiger Lily, these are all fired in the Anagama, by the way. And this pot here was up in the back of the kiln, and it was inspired by another one of my favorite architects, Frank Gehry. So as I was saying, my dad does solar power in his buildings, and the angles of his buildings are very unique to that latitude of Wyoming where he practiced as an architect. So I have a real love affair with certain angles, And so when I'm making my work, I'm constantly thinking about the way that he might draw attention to different ways of perceiving the piece, different perspectives, and how those might relate to his blueprints. So I use real fine line to do that, to draw attention to that. These pieces that you're going to see now were just in a show up in Saratoga Springs and have come out of onagama and also oxidation firing. So by oxidation firings, I mean electric firing. So I'll fire in a wood kiln. This was in about the middle of the onagama just last year. And then after the wood firing, I sand it all down and clean it up. And then I go back in and I glaze with low temperature glazes, cone 6 or lower temperature in an electric kiln. So the bottom part of that piece is fired in the onagama and the upper part of it is refired into cone 6 electric, and playing around with those angles. This is a piece that I made in Oxbow last year out in Michigan. And whenever I travel to teach workshops or do residencies, I try to use as local a clay as I possibly can in my work. And that's something that really interests me, is using something that is of the place. And so this is clay that is produced out in the Michigan area. This is work that I made in Mendocino, California this past year. Or last year, and just playing around with getting those angles and getting those pieces or those shapes that one might find in my father's buildings, and getting those into a vessel form. And that has been a real challenge for me, but a really interesting one. This is also Mendocino. This piece I made in India this past year. So you can see the difference in the color of the clay and also the color of the surface there. This is a Peters Valley clay body using some local materials from around the northwestern New Jersey area. And this one is also an India piece. So this clay body that I use came from where I was teaching the workshop down in Pondicherry, which is the southeastern coast of India. And trying to use a little bit of the iconography, but of southern India, Tamil Nadu area, but I don't want to have things specifically about a different culture. I really want to try to maintain my American culture with this. So it's a real challenge, that's a super challenge, to keep things abstracted and away from the original inspiration, and thereby, thereby creating something for myself and about myself. So, and the white areas on that piece, of course, are fired later. This is from a onagama 2 years ago. This piece I call Riverbed, and it's using a fire clay that is out of Ohio, but then also adding some of the local material into the clay. And this was fired in the Naborigama. This piece is, technically it's a stoneware, and it's about 18 inches long. So when I build my piece, I start with those bases with a big chunk of clay. 4 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches thick, and then I carve into it with a wire and flip it upside down and start building from there, thinking about my dad's architecture and other people's architecture. I like the coming and going of those slabs. They are slab built, and I like to work pretty spontaneously. This is called ledge. So this is shifting volume, or the aspect of container away from the floor a little bit. So I have the floor of the piece, but then instead of just coming right out of the right as a right angle or whatever from the floor, I shift it over. So it's just experiment. This is from a workshop I taught in Japan 2 years ago. This is Shigaraki clay, which is a very, very special clay, and it fired in an onagama there in Sasayama. This is a piece that I built this year out of clay body here at Peters Valley. And the floor of that piece, as you can see, is a low temperature glaze. When I do refiring, I tend to find that if I fire the kiln in just the right sort of way, it actually ups the amps of the wood firing. It brightens it. It also melts it into the surface, into the clay a little bit. So that's really interesting to me. This is a porcelain clay body that was fired here at Peters Valley in the Onagama. And the last couple pieces are actually oxidation fired. So these are built out of porcelain, but they are glazed with a number of variations of the same glaze. So I spray a layer, add a little bit of oxide to it, spray another layer, add a little oxide. So this is sprayed with maybe 6, 7 different glazes, all of the same quality there. I like the softness of the glaze, so that the way that it breaks on the edges and so forth, it kind of points out the structure of the piece. And this piece is based on my family and I. We're all like swimmers, so this is kind of based on a story of being on a diving board and being a little afraid to go into the water. So this is about swimming, but you might not ever know that. I'm not so interested in viewers really knowing what the stories are behind the work. I'm not into hyperreality or whatever, but that's where I get started. That's what helps inspire my next piece is thinking about a story and then converting that over into a more obscure, abstract thing. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, everybody. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Gosh, what an honor it's been to explore this story and narrative. It's beautiful.